Hi, I'm Barbara Grant, a neurodiverse couples coach working with people that have autism, ADHD, or don't, but maybe in relationship. And I am today with
Jana Smith, resilience coach. I work with individuals to help them balance and calm and regulate their nervous system so that they can better thrive.
Thank you, Jana, for being here with me. And for those who maybe haven't seen any of the work we've done yet, Jana and I met very fortuitously. We were introduced to each other at the church we go to and immediately recognized the synergy between the work we each do and the mission we're on to help others and heal, and the similarity and our understanding of neurodivergence, neurology, all of these things. So we have had a ball in the last year or two since we've met, forging a partnership of exploration, discussion, ongoing evaluation, and learning from each other and the resources out there. So today, Jana and I were talking recently about some of the dynamics of the different states, neurological states of like freeze, fight, flight, freeze, and fawn, and how freeze came up as how do we deal with that kind of thing? And we decided to share our thoughts with each other and with you in this webcast. So let's get going with that. Anything to add to that, Jana, right now?
I don't think so. I'm just excited to talk with you in ways that people can relate to and say, oh, I see myself in that, and there's hope for that.
Excellent. Okay. So yeah, so based on your idea about how we're going to do this, I'm gonna kind of paint a scenario, okay, a case study. And this is based on the reality of many couples I've coached, including my own life experience. So let's say a couple comes into my practice or your practice, and they are a neurodiverse couple. Um, I'm going to say because mostly it's the woman who's neurotypical and the man is neurodivergent, but that's not always the case. But in this case, the neurotypical is the woman. And she is fit to be tied. She is frustrated. She is a Cassandra, feeling very depleted, very misunderstood, very deprived, not seen, not soothed, not edified in any way, and is emotionally feeling neglected and is bitter and angry and sad all at the same time, and also doesn't want to make fights because she's afraid of the avoidance he shows her when she fusses. So she stuffs a lot of things. Meanwhile, her husband is working hard. He is an engineer. He is away at work a lot. He is supporting the family. You know, she works part time, but she's more home with the kids. And he is doing a lot of managing of people and partnering with people at work, and comes home and basically is kind of done done. He's used all his words by 2 in the afternoon, and is not wanting to talk and wants to maybe go and have some dinner and then just like go to do video games or go into his special interest, whatever it is. And he doesn't mean to be abandoning, but if the kids fuss and do kid things, he is snappy, he is irritable, he's anxious. He doesn't know how to initiate discussions about problems. He's like, if I don't say anything, there is no problem. And he's doing his best, but he's missing opportunities to be with his wife, and she, without meaning to, is doing things that are pushing him more away. And this dynamic has been going on for 15 years. They have teenagers and three kids, and the kids are acting out, and one of them never speaks at all. And I mean, it's just, there's a lot of dysfunction going on. So what is happening neurologically, Jen? And
Yeah,
with the lenses you look through here.
sure. Well, lots of dynamics, of course. So, what we see is various iterations of dysregulation going on within the individuals in that family. So, likely the wife is spending a lot of time in fight or flight. She may have a somewhat anxious attachment, and she's feeling upset and worried and agitated because she's not getting connection that she needs. And so often she either uses her words to poke at, her husband to try to get a connection, or she may be, like you said, suppressing. So she might be in a little bit of a functional freeze, going through all the motions, but really disconnected and stuffing her emotions. And then every so often, they rise up and she's in fight or flight, and there might be an exchange that's not very pleasant for either of them. She may sometimes also go into freeze in terms of it feels overwhelming. She's not getting her needs met. It starts to feel hopeless. She says, "Fine, I give up," and she'll retreat into her own space or with her own friends or in books or things that she likes. But it's not an I'm choosing to do a hobby because it's life-giving. It's more of a I can't stand feeling this way, and so I'm going to numb out and avoid in my own way. So that's kind of where the wife might be living. And then the husband probably is spending more time in freeze. So his nervous system does not handle conflict very well. He feels easily overwhelmed by it, and also easily overwhelmed by the kids' normal little bickering or complaining or whatever happens with teenagers. So he, spends his energy at work and then comes home and has very little margin for anything going wrong. And if the wife just looks at him the wrong way or the kids snap, his brain just goes into an overwhelmed shutdown state, and the only way that he feels like he can cope is to do something that feels soothing and life-giving for him, which, as you mentioned, is oftentimes that special interest, which again can be really positive and helpful, but when it's used to avoid, then can become a cycle that ends up with loneliness and disconnection and, fractured relationships. So that kind of paints the picture of where they are in terms of nervous system reactivity.
Okay, excellent. Well, let's do this again with another level. Okay, I love
Okay.
what we're doing here. It's helping me
Mhm.
a lot. I'm learning so much already.
Great.
Okay, so the bedroom. Okay, she is emotionally not feeling connected, and he wants to have sex, and she often is too tired or is just not feeling he loves her or cares for her. She feels like, she's a sex dispensing machine. He puts in his request and she's supposed to cooperate. And it is very soul numbing to her. And she avoids it, and she knows she should, and now she has guilt that her body is not her own. She's a Christian woman. She wants to somehow show up for her husband. On the other hand, he has decided that one of his special interests is porn. And he has been on and off going there, maybe since he was in college or a younger man. And nobody knows about this. And he doesn't feel there's an addiction, but it's a way that he goes to find he gets his needs met. Okay. And she finds out about the porn and now feels amazingly betrayed, of course, devastatingly so. And he is very upset, more maybe that he's been found out he's doing porn. So there's a level of emotional disconnect, a sexual disconnect, and a polarization about the whole idea of sex and intimacy between the two of them. What is happening neurologically for them?
So let's do two layers of this. Let's say we have this situation without porn, and then let's say we have it with, and let's look at both, because I
Okay.
think both both cases are, at various times true. So let's just say we have the first scenario where she's not feeling connected and intimacy is difficult, and he's wanting it and feeling really rejected and maybe kind of disenchanted with the whole, I waited till I was married and this is what I get, or I this is a right I should have as a husband, or whatever the case may be. So, in that kind of a situation, I want to use an analogy for our nervous system of there's a bear in the house. So when there's a lot of stress and we feel threatened in some way, emotionally, physically, where not even that we feel overtly threatened, but our nervous system doesn't feel safe enough to relax all of the way, we're living as if there's a bear in the house. When there's a bear in the house, we're going to be in one of those dysregulated states: fight or flight, fawn, functional freeze, which we can talk a little more about, or freeze. In any of those states, in terms of how it will affect intimacy and sexuality, for the most part, usually sex drive will go down, except sometimes in fight or flight, it goes up. Sometimes people will desire sex because, especially for men, typically it will pull them out of freeze temporarily in a way that feels good, just like any other addictive behavior, like video games, like binge shopping, like gambling, like drugs and alcohol. Any of that, it will perpetuate freeze, but it will give our nervous system a temporary hit of dopamine or some kind of neurochemical that makes us feel something so that we're not uncomfortably numb, but then we go back into freeze. It's not authentic connection or regulation that makes us feel truly good. It's like eating potato chips instead of dinner, basically, where it's like, oh, I was hungry. Oh, that tasted good. But like in an hour, I might feel
I
kind
would
of
I would be
stuffy.
eating Haagen-Dazs instead,
Okay, there you go. And you might feel great for an hour or two, but if you did that every night, you'd feel sick to your stomach, right? So that's what some of those behaviors that feel like they will be the antidote to freeze actually end up feeling like in real life. So that's where one of them might desire some sort of sexual behavior and the other one doesn't feel interested or feels like they can't. Typically, stereotypically for women, if they're not emotionally connected, they will, in terms of sexuality, be in a freeze response and feel numb. They will maybe not be responsive to stimulation. They will not have a desire for sex, or they might respond but feel kind of yucky and disconnected about it, guilty or used, because their body did what their body can do, but they weren't integrated. And so it feels hollow and kind of yucky afterwards. So that can be the way that it shows up for a woman. And then it can perpetuate a sense of unsafety because if the husband is frustrated, impatient, or acts pouty or sad, or I feel rejected because you're not responding the way that I want to, that doesn't feel safe for her and it will drive her into further dysregulation. For him, if she's not interested or not responsive, he feels shame and rejection. It can drive him deeper into freeze. And so it just perpetuates this splitting of their connection in their relationship, and they both feel like it's the other person's fault. Because if she would just show up and respond, he would feel so much better. And if he would actually emotionally connect with her, she might actually want sex. And so clearly it's the other person's fault. Okay, so that's that layer. And I like to present that layer because that's an example of a Christian couple where no one's living in sin.
Right.
It's just a dynamic that can develop over time with different neurotypes, different attachment styles, and there's really nobody and everybody's at fault at the same time. It's developed as a pattern, and there are things that both people have done that have contributed even unconsciously or unintentionally. But here we find ourselves with, now we haven't even had intimacy for 6 months and we don't know where to start because we're so hurt and angry and isolated.
Yeah.
Okay, so let's do the other scenario. Do you have any, well, I should let you ask questions or comment before we go to part 2.
Well, there's a lot there to take apart. So, to whatever extent the porn adds another layer of complexity, let's talk about that. Go ahead and talk about that. And
Sure.
then, of course, what we really want to do is present everyone listening with, how do we get out of this?
Yes, absolutely. Because we're not going to just leave you with, oh, here's a perfect
No,
scenario. Can you
and have
relate?
a nice day.
No. We have to wrap it up and give you some hope for getting out of it.
Right.
So if you add the porn, or if you add, maybe the wife has things that she's done to really isolate or threaten or whatever also. So that can be a factor as well. Once we have a sin or an addictive pattern layer, first we have to recognize people end up there because they're deeply hurting. So before we point fingers, even though there needs to be accountability and that behavior is destructive to a marriage, if we can come from the place of this really hurts the other spouse and we need to attend to that pain and work on some healing, we also need to understand that it's likely that the denial is related to shame, that the husband doesn't really, they would rather have a real, authentic connection. They may feel stuck, and the defensiveness and the minimizing may just be to cover up the real pain and the shame that goes along with it. So it's a sign of deep struggle first, secondary to the character choice. And when we have an addiction going on, that becomes, the initial choices are the sin choices. And when the addiction perpetuates, oftentimes that's more about neurochemistry and pain and dysregulation than it is about the actual activity that's happening. And we have to hold accountability and say, we're not going to tolerate that anymore. So when you add, in terms of adding that for the dynamic of dysregulation, when you add in the pornography, then you have an even deeper layer that we're driving into fear and a lack of safety, which again perpetuates more dysregulation. Regulation happens when we feel safe. Dysregulation is what the brain does as soon as it detects or perceives, real or not, a threat to safety. So it's going to make just a deeper hole that we're in that we have to climb out of for the wife to feel safe, to reestablish trust, to want to try to connect, to be willing to consider intimacy, and to heal around feeling used and wondering okay, what does this mean for all of our past relationships and interactions, and how do I filter all of what I have experienced with what I now know? And most likely in a situation like that, there's going to be individual, separate attention that needs to be given to each one of them so that they can work through the layers of pain and stuckness that they are in.
Yeah. Okay. Excellent. Well, and so what I'm hearing, let me just see if I can recap it. What our initial scenario was basically just a neurodiverse couple at odds struggling, added now with how that's affected their sex life or intimacy or lack of thereof. And now even another level of betrayal or deeply entrenched habitual addictive behavior, right? And what I'm hearing you say is that there still is hope. There's always hope.
Yeah.
And probably as we get to the discussion now about remedy, that no matter what level you're on, it's just gone sideways to, we're not even sleeping together, to I feel totally betrayed, or I'm enmeshed with porn. The way out, I think we're going to find, is the same path out. It's different levels. Okay. And to add to the complexity without, going off topic far, is that there are many, many women who have been sexually abused as children.
Yes.
And so betrayal for them and sexual danger and threat is just unbearable. Right. And so that's why even when the guy isn't doing porn or isn't adulterous in any way, or is even not a bad lover, if there's anything off in her stress world and she feels any unsafety, a lot of women are haunted by residual trauma that they haven't really resolved. And maybe don't even remember happened to them until they get to a place of safety that they can actually deal with the trauma of sexual abuse that might have happened to them as children. So there are couples that struggle with her with sexual abuse, him with porn, and there is still hope. There is still hope in those scenarios. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. And not to mention all the other complicated things that happen in life, such as hormones, perimenopause, menopause. So there are seasons too
financial. I mean, there's always stuff.
Yeah.
But in all of the things that we know can afflict us as fallen people in a fallen world, I want to start with the fact that Jesus said, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." All right. Yes, you will have trouble in this world. Take heart, I have overcome the world. And that I always like to say, all of us on the planet, we are basically a bunch of losers. but we happen to be on a winning team because our captain is a winner. So somehow, we have got to transfer our understanding as Christians, dysfunctional, broken, in fight, flight, freeze, fawn. And we will talk about the difference between functional and freeze, functional freeze and freeze, that Jesus has overcome all of these things and has shown us how we can regulate, how we can get out of these places of habitual patterns and renew our minds and no longer conform to the broken patterns of the world, but sight him, walk on water towards him, and not go under.
Yes.
And if we do, he's there to catch us. So I want to frame that up really primarily because without him, there sometimes is no hope. There's no true north. There's no up. It's just like down, down, down. Is that right?
Yes. Yeah. We have to understand that we come into the world with value before we do anything else. And if there's no source of that, why would we believe it? So knowing that God created us and loved us and has a purpose helps us speak a different narrative to our system that might not feel true yet because the things that have been reflected back to us throughout our lives might not affirm that. But if we know it to be true, then we can work on getting our system to align to that truth.
Yeah. So I love what you just said about we might know it's true, but it doesn't feel familiar or right because our habit of affirmation is the opposite, that this isn't true, there is no hope, I'm stuck, I'm bad, he's bad, she's bad, a lot of judgment, a lot of shame, a lot of blame, right? So talk a little bit about the difference. Let's focus on the freeze idea because I think everyone more readily identifies when there's fight going on. And they also identify when there's flight going on. And I think many people are more able to relate to the people pleasing, fawning, placating, non-conflict avoidant kind of stuff, right? But what is functional freeze and what is freeze? What does that look like? And
Yeah.
how do we deal with that?
Yeah, great questions. Freeze is the nervous system state that our brain adopts when it feels that things have gotten so overwhelming and it can't handle what's going on and the pain is too intense, even emotional, that it has no option but to shut down. And the analogy that we can all relate to is we've watched a nature show where there's a wild cat chasing a gazelle, and right before the predator pounces, the prey goes limp and falls over. So that's a nervous system state like freeze where it goes into this shutdown state to minimize the experience of pain. So a lot of times blood pressure and heart rate drop, we can feel unmotivated, disconnected from our body, like we're walking through a cloud. So brain fog can go along with
Brain
that.
fog, right?
Mhm.
Disassociation. Yeah,
Yep,
right.
fatigue, and just kind of a flatness. Like the
Yeah,
things that used to make you happy don't feel that interesting. I mean, it sounds a little bit like being depressed, but the difference between clinical depression and freeze is clinical depression is deeper and it's long lasting, whereas freeze is just a nervous system response to that overwhelm, and we can get stuck there. So it can look a lot like depression. But it responds well to nervous system rehabilitation.
okay.
Any questions about that one before we go to functional freeze?
No, I think that's so important that you just, delineated that though, because a lot of people present who are neurodivergent actually with a freeze presentation and they are misdiagnosed as depressed.
Yes.
And
And
it
I think, yeah, one of the big reasons for that is because a neurodivergent brain has a larger fear center, larger amygdala. So they're more vulnerable to dysregulating. And if you collect all the dysregulation over their life, if they're in a contentious relationship, their system's going to go, I just can't.
right,
This is too painful and it'll shut them down. And it's not a conscious choice. This is the way the brain works automatically to protect you, just like it would if, the fire alarm started going off in your house. You wouldn't think, I'm going to run out of the house. Your system just takes over. And so It's not a cruel or an intentional choice to cut people out. Sometimes, especially with autism, they can look catatonic. You're having a back and forth discussion, it's getting heated, and they will just go blank.
Yeah.
So, and they're not doing that to be unkind or cruel or abandoning, but it certainly creates that kind of a feeling in a dynamic.
Yeah.
So then to go on to functional freeze. Functional freeze is a combination state between fight or flight and freeze. And the way that it shows up is usually the person is going through all the motions. So instead of being catatonic or blank and disconnected and not moving, or not engaging, they're still doing the things they're supposed to do. They're going to work, they're going to the grocery store, maybe they're working out, maybe they're, coaching the kids' soccer team or going to the softball game, but they're not internally connected to their body all the way. So they have some of the similar emotional experiences of freeze where they might feel flat or numb or maybe just in their head. Like if you were to stop and really ask them, do you know where your arms and legs are in space, right? And they would have to think about it because they're just living from here up. And getting things done, but it doesn't feel good, and it might feel like internal overwhelm. Um, and it's not a very comfortable place to be.
Yeah. And I'm imagining too that there becomes a habitual familiarity with being in that state. So any awareness of it is kind of like asking what a fish what water is. It's
Yeah.
like, what do you mean what is water? Like that's all I've ever known. I don't know there is such a thing as water. I'm not in water. This is my reality. So people might not even be able to identify, oh, I think I'm in functional freeze. Like there's just the way they are. And they're so habitually stuck there, it's hard to perceive that, and it's a very very subtle state of paralysis, I guess, in a disconnect way, not such a functional way, but a disconnect from mind and body and heart, um, kind of a way. And it also is not a place where people can really have agency to choose or make choices or grieve
Mhm.
or express healthy anger or problem solve really on any significant level. Is that true?
Mhm. That's true because the emotions are sort of shut down. So if you were to ask them, how does that make you feel? Not only is that sometimes inaccessible or difficult for somebody who's neurodivergent, but there may be a nervous system state block of
Right.
being able to access that. And oftentimes, if you take a neurodivergent individual who is regulated and ask them how they feel, they might be able to say, well, happy, sad, or good. It might be limited. They might not have 15 words or 20 to
Mhm.
describe the nuances of their emotional experience, but they can usually say yay or nay. If
Right.
they're in functional freeze or freeze, they might go, I don't know.
Right.
So it's not that somebody who's autistic doesn't have a complete incapability of feeling or connecting to
Right.
how they feel.
Right. Well, I think that's very important because alexithymia is something that floats around in a lot of discussions about neurodivergence. And alexithymia is a clinical inability to know what it is you're feeling and to even identify feelings in others or to speak about important emotional information because you're either not feeling it or not understanding it can be felt. And I know that alexithymia happens in other clinical situations, not just neurodiversity. But what you're saying is making me wonder whether alexithymia is sometimes just really deep and long-standing functional freeze
Mhm.
that results in what presents as alexithymia, just as freeze in general can present as depression, right?
Yeah.
So it's not so much what the label is, it's what is happening or not happening. That is
Yeah, I
really
would love to see
important.
research into that.
Yeah.
And for two things that I want to share about that. One, I have a client who is not neurodivergent, had severe Lyme and
Mhm.
developed alexithymia afterwards as part of sort of the nervous
Right,
system
right,
dysregulation that happened, and came saying, I have alexithymia. What is that? I want help with it, thinking it was sort of a permanent state. And we dug into it, and it was kind of a situation of, wait a minute, you had the full range of emotions all before your perfect
Right.
storm. That sounds like freeze. Let's treat it like freeze and see what happens. And she's making really lovely incremental progress.
Wow.
So it actually made me wonder how many neurodivergent people who have alexithymia or the experience of alexithymia,
Mhm.
does it track back to childhood of you cannot have a screaming meltdown? That's not acceptable.
Right.
So you start,
Pushing your
like,
feelings down. Right.
yes, not because there's not a way to express it that's socially acceptable. So you realize emotions are out of control, emotions are dangerous. We're going to put a
Mhm.
lid on the emotions, and you practice that because that's maturing and growing up. And the
Right.
next thing you
Right.
know, you've got alexithymia. So I want someone to do that research
Well, maybe
and
you're
figure
going
it
to
out.
need to do it.
Yeah, good PhD thesis topic.
You and I can walk on over to OSU, Oregon State University, and knock on some doors and say, "Can anybody help us with this project?"
That'd be fantastic. Yeah. So we'll see what research shows, but I
Yeah.
think it's worth assuming that freeze is overlapping it. If that's going on, let's work with the freeze and see what opens up. The
Mm.
other thing that's really important to understand is when you're in a freeze state, it's like you sat on your foot and you stood up and you had pins and needles. And the very first thing you experience is pain because the freeze is numbing something for a reason. And when we defrost from freeze, everything comes up in whatever measure it wants to, sometimes out of proportion to reality. And we may be acutely aware of emotional or physical pain that freeze was numbing or like a pain reliever keeping us from feeling. So we might feel joy, but we might feel like fuming anger at random moments as we're waking back up our emotions. And that does not mean you're doing it wrong and it's time to head back and freeze and throw your hands up about this whole thing. It means that we need to do feeling and reconnecting in small doses in a safe way so the nervous system can onboard with feeling again.
Well, what you're saying is actually something that I myself experienced, and I had suffered from abuse in my childhood with a mother who meant well, but was very PTSD and very out of control. And I did a lot of suppression of emotion, and it was only when I was 42 and was the parent of younger children myself that I began to, and I had come to faith, and I felt safe enough. I began to process and remember a lot more about the abuse and was willing to emotionally address it. And what you're describing is exactly, I came out of freeze on that, and I was in functional freeze big time. I was cracking, cranking away, um, and spent like a year and a half in a small group work processing stuff with women, crying daily
Yeah.
and angry and throwing pillows and mostly about stuff in my past, not in my present. And
Mhm.
it was life-giving. It was very hard to know what to do with all these feelings, but in time I was able to get through it. Is that kind of what you're talking about?
Yeah, that's exactly what I'm talking about. And we want to put guardrails around it
Mhm.
because out of control feeling is going to not feel safe to the nervous system and it's going to drive us into different types of dysregulation. But it's also not going to be healthy for the people around us. And so we want the right supports in place to give space for feeling, but feeling in measured amounts,
Right.
supported by safety around that for the nervous system so we can heal, not just re traumatize ourselves.
Well, that's so important, and in the work that I do with couples, especially, and even with the individuals, as they're beginning to really explore their opportunities to figure out their wiring, what happened to them as kids, how did they get where they are relationally, functionally, where are their boundaries, why did they never get taught boundaries, all of the things that we deal with, as you know. Um, I talk a lot about space and grace, and that the need for space and grace at this time of entering the zone of opportunity is so critical, because if scud missiles and hand grenades keep going off in your own life, at yourself or the other, that is driving you back into fear and back into repression or acting out. So offering yourself radical self-compassion is a technical term in clinical practice for people to begin to accept um, who they are and how they are and not judge themselves, as well as their partner, accepting how they are, who they are, and not judging them and letting them work it out and seeing it's not about them, it's about what that person has to work out. So let's talk now a little bit about how people start to thaw or dig out, or what do they need to think about, and as an individual and then as a couple.
hmm So, safety within your nervous system is first established internally. Now, we can get safety from other people, and a lot of times that's what we're looking for when we've been traumatized is we want someone to help us co-regulate. We're looking for that safe connection that will speak safety back to us so we know we're okay. But essentially, in a way, that's codependency. We do need other people and we need some safe connections. And sometimes at first, that's just a counselor or a coach or somebody, a mentor at church, but they can't be your everything. Because essentially, that would mean being completely reparented all over again. And we can't really ask for that as adults. And there are no perfect people out there. Um, an aunt in my family one time used illustration from the Old Testament of the broken cisterns where God says to Israel that you keep turning to broken cisterns and he's the only one with living water. So we want to create a safe attachment to God first and foremost and not demand that from our spouse or expect it because they're a broken cistern. They might be able to give us a few drops of water, but they cannot fill our cistern. Only God can do that. And so while we need other people to help us support and repair the cracks in our cistern, no one can fill it for us. And so that's where we take responsibility for our own growth and sort of refueling. And then there are all kinds of tools that we can use to speak safety back to our body and back to our brain and nervous system that help us restore balance and slowly come out of fight or flight, freeze, that the different dysregulated states over time to cultivate that internal safety. And then we can start interacting with the other people around us from a different place and from a place of regulation. And in time, that helps speak safety to their nervous system. So whether or not they're willing to do work, if they're not willing to do work, it can take years to really heal and settle everything down. If they're willing to do their own work, then it can move somewhat faster. But either way, it's a slow process because the brain operates in all of those patterns and those ruts that it has developed over decades of our life. And so this isn't an overnight process, but you can start to feel better and have some inner peace fairly quickly as you begin to practice tools.
Okay. So, one of the things that I learned from you was the butterfly hug, right?
Mm,
Which I then took to a different level and married it with the teaching of Paul in Philippians 4 and call it angel wings, where we're not only tapping and hugging and breathing, but we are speaking truth. We're stating the problem and petitioning, and then thinking what is pure, lovely, admirable, noble, all the good things, the promises of God, the affirmations of who we are in the Lord, of who He is, and entering that place of the peace that transcends understanding. So that is very effective when people are overtly dysregulated and in anger, in fight or even in flight where there's some movement and they can access it. What tools, if you can even name one quickly
mhm,
or several,
sure.
would freeze access? And what understanding does freeze need to have? Like, I think I'm frozen. I'm not sure what I'm feeling. How do I deal with that? How do I even get started?
Yeah. One of my favorite exercises for freeze is to go through your five senses because freeze is a disconnection, it's not safe, and so I want to disconnect from my body so I don't feel pain. If we can bring ourselves back into a present moment experience of something that's neutral or positive, that speaks safety back to the nervous system. And that's something we can do all by ourselves. So you can just go through your five senses in any order, and you can find, some people will do 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, like 5 things I can see. For my brain, because I have an ADHD brain, that's too many to keep track of. So I just will pick one for each one, and it still works just as well. So you can look around the room and find one thing that you can notice and rest your attention on for a few moments. And even just moving your eyes can open up your frame. When we are in dysregulation, our frame narrows, kind of like tunnel vision, because that's something that can help us deal with danger or focus. So even just moving your head and looking around sends a message to the nervous system that we're not in danger. And then you can find a color or something on the wall or something out the window and just notice it for a few moments and breathe. Notice the texture, the color, is there movement, and all of that. And then you can go through all of your senses. What can I hear? What can I smell? And what can I feel? And when you get to touch, sometimes it's helpful to finger the fabric of your shirt or hold a fuzzy pillow, or run your fingertips down your arms and just notice the sensation against your skin. So that's a great way to get you into your body. If that feels too overwhelming and you're in a really deep freeze, sometimes just starting with something simple, this is called micro movements, which is just hold your hands up in front of you and just watch them. And it doesn't require much, right? What you'll find is if you hold them up, because you're not trying to hold them stiff and still, is that they'll just wiggle a little bit every so often. And you just sit and watch it. And it, again, helps you connect with a part of your body so that you're not so in your head. Now you're noticing your hands, and you can even notice the temperature, or, press them together and rub them, create warmth. So there's a lot we can do just really simply with our body to bring ourselves back into that present and calm state.
Excellent. 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 Well, I know that exercise, we hear exercise is so important. Exercise is so good for us. Aerobic exercise produces all the good brain chemistry we're looking for. It does all the cardio and blood, it was like, and what I'm hearing too is that exercise can be one of the vehicles for combating freeze.
Yeah.
In that, if we're intentional about not killing ourselves to pump iron or run a marathon, but take a walk, and go on a walk with an intention of smelling the forest or the freshly cut lawn, feeling the breeze on our face, or touching a bark of a tree, or tasting a berry that you pick on the way. And where we live in Oregon, there are blackberries on the trails. I love that. Like, we can create and look for opportunities where we can have a multitude of a feast of sensory experience, and even understand that that's what we're doing. We're not just going to take a walk. We're going to walk in our bodies, in our sensory awareness, and breathe into that, and defrost. I'm going out to defrost now, honey.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, when you do that, you may have to start with small increments. It
Yeah.
may be, I'm going to do this for 30 seconds, and then I'm just going to kind of numbly walk again. Because if you try to force yourself to do it for a whole 45-minute walk, if you're
No,
not
no,
used to that, it can
no.
be super overwhelming, or you
No,
might
no, no.
bind
Yeah.
the
Like, you just
emotions.
take a pause,
Yeah.
and even, a lot of people I know are using the Pause app by John Eldridge, which I love, but I think that there are probably sensory exercises similar to that, or apps similar to that, that people can activate an app that tells them, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you feel? What do you and maybe, if you have resources like that, you can let me know. We can put it in the show notes. Because I think people need help to disrupt their day, to sit down and unfreeze, to tune in, right? And get in the habit of doing that, and relaxing into it more and more without overwhelming themselves, right? Taking those baby steps, and then broadening and deepening their experience of being in their bodies and being aware. And I think too, that's a lot of what meditation does. I mean, people who practice tantric Buddhist meditation, it's all about just breathing and feeling the floor underneath your back. And yoga is like that. So there's gentle things that are out there, if we're understanding they're working on our freeze, it's easier to enjoy and embrace them for more than just what we think it's, right?
Yeah, and some of those things can feel new age and scary and whatever, and there's so many resources now that don't have that flavor.
Mhm.
God created our breath. There's so much talk about breath and
Right.
life in the Bible. So
Yes.
if we can look for resources that speak to that and help us connect to the body that God created us to live in, that can be very healing and also safe, because if you're dysregulated and you're worried about, I don't want to go off the rails to something weird, that can
Mhm.
also feel scary and uncomfortable. So
Right.
it's nice to
Right.
know that there's a lot of resources that are well intentioned to support those of us with a Christian belief system that aren't
Mhm.
threatening our faith.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And yeah, and I didn't mean to imply that anybody become a tantric Buddhist. I'm
No,
just
no,
saying
I
that,
know. That's why I
yeah.
said that, because I know, like, for me, when I was really dysregulated and I was looking for resources to heal, a lot of the things that were front and center about 10 years ago were those kinds of things. And it upset me because I didn't know, when I was looking for something, am I going to find something that's supporting my faith or not?
Mhm.
Because it doesn't
Right.
feel safe to try to get better with something that's really out there in left field.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. And yeah, having a gentleness and a um, an exploratory mind, but not a force myself into anything is very counterproductive for what you're trying to do, which is thaw out and make it safe for yourself. So let's talk a little bit now about helping increase safety for each other if both, maybe one or both, are functionally frozen and sometimes overt, like noticeably frozen. How does that look? What could that look like for a couple?
Well, the first piece is related to what we talked about already, which is become a safe, regulated person in the relationship. So work on yourself so that your own dysregulation is not triggering the other person. We can only control what we do. And that's a very powerful first step. Second, I think, is to understand and reframe that what they are doing is more about their own self protective, safety seeking goal than it is about you. So it's easy to see freeze as rejection, as cruel, as unkind, as cutoff. And it may be that that person doesn't know what else to do. And internally, there's a part of them that's terrified and they're just coping. And while it might feel pointed because they're reacting to you, they may not have the skills or the safety historically to say how they feel, or to know how to process those emotions. And so, offering, just even internally, compassion toward that other person instead of judgment and offense, that it's kind of like the 3-year-old part of their brain took over and they don't know what to do, so they're just hunkered down in the corner. So if we can see it that way, we can have a little bit of compassion, and as we demonstrate regulated behavior over time, we can invite them into that safety with us.
Right.
Hey, I see that, this seems a little bit uncomfortable for you. Is there anything I can do to contribute to safety? And honestly, not nagging and not criticizing, and finding your own joy, even if it's separate from them, will help them relax
Yeah.
and have that invitation to begin working on things.
I agree with you. Like right now, the group I'm leading, we're working on how to build your joy team. Um, and the idea, I think, came because what I see happening a lot is that one person will come out of dysregulation before the other does. It's very rare that they both both come out at the same time. And if you're coming out of functional freeze and you're starting to deal with your anger, your sorrow, you you really can't bring that to your partner who is in functional freeze or freeze. That is not going to work. That's going to push them even farther away. So finding people that you can process that with, a
Mhm.
therapist, a coach, a friend, a pastor, somebody, who's just safe. And then, as I'm thinking, like, as spring thaw happens, what happens? Everything starts to grow. And if you need to be growing and going and doing and sprouting, and your partner isn't ready for that, going outside of the relationship to do those things, to experience and explore your gifting,
Hmm.
experience and explore and have adventures, and you know, whatever that might mean, creatively, relationally, intellectually, going to school, getting a new job, who knows, volunteering. It is not required that you sit home waiting for your partner to come out of the ice box,
Hmm.
while you're like very unhappy and bored and lonely, because they
Yeah.
may not come out anytime soon if they come out.
Hmm.
But you're right. When you give them space by going on your own exploration of what you're now ready for, you're ready for more life, you're ready to engage, you're ready to experience life to the fullest, right? That doesn't take anything away from them, and it gives you what you need.
Hmm.
Is that
Hmm.
true?
Yeah, and it's a big, it's a big step to recognize maybe most of my needs are going to be met in a different way
Mhm.
through an art class, through a Bible study, through and to take the attention off expecting it. Oftentimes, and this goes really ties back to the conversation about sex, oftentimes we have no ability to have a yes until we've been completely allowed to have a no.
Oh, I love that. That is so
So,
true.
whether it's women in the bedroom or men engaging emotionally with the relationship, they may need both parties may need the demand to stop and for them to settle down and feel lonely enough that they're actually ready to say, maybe I could have a yes, but it's not an obligatory yes.
Right.
We all want the people in our life to want to be with us. And one of the best ways we can create that is by giving space to allow their desire to come up. And not everybody will, sometimes if we give space, they just wander off and lose interest in their, into their
Yeah.
special interest.
Yeah.
But we can't obligate them into wanting things. And we give them the best opportunity to want it by not demanding it anymore.
Well, what you're describing is how God loves us.
Mhm.
Jesus came, before he came, there were heralds, he's coming, before life began, the word was with the Father, and through him all things were made, and he's been with us ever since, whenever. And he came and offered himself and showed us how to come home to him in fullness. He blessed us with forgiveness and grace. It's an invitation, but it's not a demand. And it is a gift that we can open and enjoy and live in, or choose to ignore and leave it and never engage. And he loves us enough to give us the freedom to say no. Because until we feel, you're right, until we know we can say no, our yes is a program scripted yes. It's not an authentic yes, I think. So
Yeah.
yeah. Wow. Well, we've come full circle back to the Lord, and obviously we could keep talking, but there'll be another time. Is there any final words that you want to say, and then we can give each of our contact information, how we can be connected with. But is there any last thoughts you want to share, Jana?
Sure. Well, there's one thing I want to say about your analogy in the spring when everything starts sprouting. You know what comes up in droves in the spring? Weeds.
Yeah, they're in my yard.
Yeah.
They're all in my yard.
Yeah, they love the spring. And sometimes there's three times as many of them as, the tulip bulbs and the things that are coming up. One of the other reasons to give space is because when you defrost, the emotions that come up are going to be raw, out of caliber with what has happened, unpredictable, sometimes quick and overwhelming. And our partner may have liked us better when we were in freeze if they get the full brunt of that. So you really want to be mindful that when you are defrosting and things are starting to grow and flourish and the emotions are starting to surface, that you give yourself enough processing time and space and journal or some, tools and exercises for your nervous system, exercise outlet other people so that it doesn't come aimed at your partner or that's going to push them deeper into fear. So, with that, what I will say is this process, though it might be full of weeds, also it has that beautiful promise of things bloom in the end. So, we don't always know what color the flower is going to be. We don't always know if we're going to be in a big bunch of a patch or we're going to be a little lone flower right there. But we can trust that God brings things to fruition.
Yeah.
And if we engage and lean in, there will be a beautiful bloom in time. And that's what we're aiming for, not controlling the process or trying to do it in a sanitized garden, because there's no such thing, but getting toward that goal and keeping our eye on that.
Amen. Oh, I love that. What a gift. What a gift that God thought to say that to you and you said it to us. I love it. Well, so why don't you go ahead, share your, how do we find you? And then I'll share mine and then, we'll ta-ta.
Good. So the best way to find me is my website, Jana, Janam, like Mary, Smith.com. And all the resources are there.
Awesome. Lots of great ways. Yes, I love that I send people there often and they always come home or back enriched. And similarly for me, Barbara Grant, bg-hc.com. That's short for Barbara Grant, hopeforcouples.com. And, or you could just Google Barbara Grant neurodiverse coach and you will find me. And we are often asked, if one-on-one time, we have courses, we do consult one-on-one and coach one-on-one. There's a smorgasbord of opportunity and it's always in process. So please reach out. We both have newsletters and are active in keeping people up to date about our coaching practices. And we just want to thank you all for the time you've given us to talk about this, learn from each other, and hopefully hear from you all soon. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.